Okay, so welcome again, everybody. With us today, we have John Wodehouse from Penn State Extension, primarily down in Region 9, but John does do extension work statewide. And joining John also from Penn State College of Ag Sciences, plant science faculty, Sarah Cornelisse. Both Sarah and John are going to be talking today about horticultural marketing, passing on some concepts, theories, and advice that you can then use with your students in terms of marketing horticultural production operations. So John and Sarah, it is all yours. I will be monitoring questions that you might have in the chat box. Please feel free to ask away. If it's relevant to the discussion at hand, we'll stop in a moment. If not, we will also have a Q&A session in the last 10 to 5 minutes of the hour together. So John and Sarah, all yours.
Thank you very much, John. Sarah, would you like to introduce yourself? I think first ladies go first. You can say a few words, and then I'll advance the slides in, and then we'll get started.
Sure. Thanks everybody for joining. I'm Sarah Cornelisse. I'm a senior extension associate in the Department of Agricultural Economics, Sociology, and Education. And so I work statewide and develop educational materials and programs on a lot of different topics, but direct marketing, social media marketing, e-commerce are some of the topics that I focus on currently. That's
great. And I'll just take this opportunity to thank John for the invite here and welcome everybody. My name is John Wodehouse. I work in the Energy Business and Community Vitality team as part of Penn State Extension, which is under the College of Ag Science. My background is in landscape nursery science, business, finance, and some leadership development. So I'm really happy to be here today. What you're looking at now is our university statement that we are committed to equal access to programs. You can read that at your leisure, and we'll keep on going here through the presentation. Do I have the opportunity to advance the slides? This we go. Okay, so this presentation is available on alternative media upon request. Where trade names appear, no discrimination is attended, and no endorsement by Penn State Extension is expressed or implied. So today's presenters, as you just met, are Sarah Cornelisse, myself, John Wodehouse, and we've been helped out by Kathy Kelly, Dr. Kathy Kelly from Maine campus, professor of horticulture, marketing, and business. And she has an affiliate appointment with agribusiness management in the Department of Agricultural Economics and Sociology and Education. Kathy's been instrumental in helping us with some of the slides today and some of the concepts. So we would be remiss to not mention that we're so grateful for her help with this program. We do ask if you have questions, please put them in the chat or the question and answer. And if you have a question, you can raise your thumb up or use a signal. You can ask along the way. Both Sarah and I are totally okay with that. If it's a nice relevant question to what's going on. If not, we'll have a question and answer at the end and we'll kind of go from there. Today's journey was based on your needs, and what we're going to be overviewing and talking about is getting customers to your greenhouse or nursery versus the one down the road. And we're going to talk about how do you know what to sell and what will sell. And then also Sarah's going to talk about pricing plants for retail sales. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it to Sarah. You can have the slide control back, and then I'll sit back for a few minutes because I'll be in to talk a little bit about promotion. So thank you so much for the opportunity to introduce everybody and get things going.
Okay, great. Thank you, John.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see here. So to start off, the issues that were on the previous slide that John just covered that we're going to address here today, these can all be addressed through these three strategies shown here. So we're going to discuss segmentation, targeting the audience segment that you identify, and then some positioning and differentiation strategies to use that a horticultural business can use in order to generate sales and connect with their audience. So the first concept is market segmentation, and this is kind of a trap that a lot of businesses fall into, is that they think everyone is their audience. That's not really the case. There's a portion of the population that will be your audience, but then there's also a large segment of the population who will not be a customer for a business. And so you have to take the time to sort of segment out those different groups and determine who is actually your true customer, who has a need and a desire to purchase the product that you're selling. And within that smaller segment, so you saw in the previous slide, it was broken into 60-40. So continuing on with that 40% that has been identified as consumers that have a need for a product, you can break that down even further into smaller segments, such as that shown here on the screen, where you might have a segment of that population. It's in the example here on the screen that can be described as a frequent user or purchaser of the product. You may have some that are occasional purchasers and some that are maybe just discovering the product that you have to sell or discovering your business. And all businesses can break that larger segment that has a need for your product down into these smaller segments, and you're going to focus on that segment that maybe is a frequent user, for example, and call that your primary market segment. So those are the people who are your best and first customers, and that's where you're going to gear most of your marketing efforts to targeting them with the product, your product marketing and your communications, maybe your pricing strategies, because that meets their needs. You may have then also those smaller pieces of or portions of the population that you can then call maybe a secondary or a tertiary market segment, and they may respond to some marketing tactics that you use, but they may also not respond to those marketing tactics. And then finally, through positioning and differentiation, you can really narrow or hone in on what your marketing strategy is through these 4 steps. Knowing what your customers' needs and wants are, and that's the next kind of topic that we're going to cover. Doing a SWOT analysis of your business, understanding what your competition is, and what their position is in the marketplace, and how you compare to them, and then finally identifying what your competitive advantages are. So where can you differentiate yourself from the competition, and that makes an impact with that market segment that has been identified as your first investment customer. So to know your customers' needs and wants, you really have to take the time to get to know them. And on the screen here, I have a lot of different questions about, what it is that you want to understand and know about your customers. Certainly, you need to know where they are, where they're located. Are they just around the corner? Are they in the same geographic region, or are they further away? What do they need? So what is their problem that they are solving by purchasing the product that you have for sale? You want to understand their values, what drives them to make the purchases that they do. What is their willingness and ability to pay for your product? How can they withstand price changes? What's their willingness to withstand the price change? Because that's different than ability. Somebody may have the ability to purchase, but they may not be willing to spend that money. And you can see the other questions here on the screen. You want to make sure that you can reach them with your marketing and sales messages, for example, because certainly if the consumer does not know that, one, you exist, or what it is that you have for sale that's going to solve their problem, then they're not going to be able to come and purchase from you. And one of the ways that we can segment that customer market, consumer segment, excuse me, is by using what we call these pillars of segmentation. And there are 4 general categories here behind market segmentation. You can look at geographics, which has to do with where they're located, maybe the language that they speak, the population density of a certain area. You can look at demographics, and these are typically the aspects that we think of in terms of the census. So age, gender, educational level, family status, what their occupation is. We can also look at psychographics, and that has a lot to do with how consumers think and feel about issues and products. And then finally, looking at their behaviors. And that is, as opposed to kind of what the consumer thinks, this is what they actually do in real life. So, how often do they purchase a certain product? Are they, how engaged are they with the business? What sorts of things do they want to receive from the business? What sort of benefits are they looking for? And there can be a disconnect between the psychographics and the behaviors. We see this often come out in consumer surveys where, surveys will ask, well, what's important to you? And they may say things like sustainability. However, when then that same consumer goes into the store, they may then purchase products that, just by appearance, you say, well, how does that match up? You just told me that you're very concerned about sustainability, but you're then purchasing this product that perhaps maybe has a lot of plastic packaging, and that may not clearly match that belief that they just stated. So taking a quick look at some of these in a little deeper in depth. Here's one demographic characteristic, and this has to do specifically with generations. And you see here on the slide that we've got 5 different generations. And there's actually now, I think, a 6th, but it's not clearly defined yet at this point. And so all of the consumers fall into one of these generations, and you can see they're anywhere from 15 to about 18 or 20 years. It makes a generation. And actually the Gen X population here in the center is the smallest. So that group of consumers that fall into that Gen X generation, there's the fewest number of those consumers. And knowing what generation a consumer falls into can help with identifying what marketing tactics you put in place for the business to connect with them. Social media is a good example, for instance, because different social media platforms are used differently by these different generations. And Facebook, for example, is very popular overall, but as consumers are younger, our younger consumers actually use Facebook far less than some of our Gen X and Boomer generations or individuals. And so the Gen Z population may be more attuned to, say, TikTok. And so understanding that, is very helpful when you when you're thinking and deciding upon what your marketing communications, what tools you're going to utilize. And however, there's a caveat with this. So it's easy to say that your target consumer falls into a certain grouping, and therefore you're going to do X, Y, and Z marketing based on that. So you're going to do certain things because you're targeting, say, the millennial generation. However, there's still a great deal of variability within demographic groupings. So you want to use it as a guide, but also understand that there's going to be those outliers, and have some other tactics that you also can implement to meet or to connect with those outliers. Here's an example of geographic segmentation, and on the slide here, we've looked. Let me see if I can get my pointer. So this one here looks at zoning in the Washington, D.C. area. And you can see that the yellow is actually all those, areas where there are detached single-family homes. The green is open space or agricultural reserve areas, and then the brown is everything else. And so, those might be those multi-family dwellings, office buildings, etc. And from a horticultural standpoint, for instance, you can then make some educated guesses as to what the needs of those different population areas are. So single family homes, they're perhaps going to be interested in certain products, for landscaping purposes, whereas the brown areas, they may have different needs for their landscaping. And so you would target those differently with the set of products that you offer. For the behavioral category, then you can see some of the different issues that you can address by understanding behaviors. And one of those is the use of a product. And this example is really great that Kathy shared with us. And she found this where McDonald's characterizes 70% of its customers as heavy users. And so they have 70% of their customers who come to McDonald's once a week. And so that's, some of us may think, well, that's quite often. But then on top of that, they have 25% of those customers that they categorize as super heavy users who come multiple times per week. And then looking at kind of some of the additional demographics for those super heavy users, they found that it's typically that 18 to 34-year-old male. So of course, McDonald's is going to do some marketing, make their marketing decisions, to target those super heavy users and gear that marketing towards that 18 to 34-year-old male kind of psyche. What resonates with men that age, and that's going to be a lot of what their marketing is, because they've found that these are their customers, and they want them to keep coming back. Switching to kind of psychographics and that values, what consumers value that they may be drawn to. There's, when it comes to kind of consumer good products, and these are all examples that I've taken from dairy products. That's another area that I do work in. And there's a lot of different certifications that a business or a product can have. Some of those are here on the screen. And they resonate differently with different generations. And so, for example, 38% of frozen treat buyers have said that they're more likely to buy a certain brand of that frozen treat if the brand has taken a stance on a cause. And so, it might be, for instance, the brand demonstrates a connection to ensuring that the bee population is growing, or they want to engage in fair trade practices, or perhaps they've gone through the process of getting certified as a B corporation, which has to do with kind of some of the social elements of the workers, and not so much the production of the product, but how their workers are treated. And so seeing a certification like that can, draw a consumer in, because they're saying, okay, this brand values some of the same things that I do. And for the younger generations, as shown here on the screen, millennials and Gen Z, this is even more important than kind of the overall average consumer. So I think as more of our younger consumers kind of come into the marketplace and have greater spending power, they're going to be looking for these sorts of value statements with the products or by the businesses that they're purchasing from. And so that can be a very valuable marketing technique, is to share those values with your consumers or potential consumers. Attitudes, of course, can influence purchasing by consumers. And this is another great slide that Kathy shared with us. It has to do with bottled water. So some of the attitudes that consumers have about bottled water is that, okay, it's safer than tap water. It's healthier than soda. In the instance of Perrier, it conveys a certain message about who they are as a consumer by having that Perrier bottle. And in some geographic regions, the attitude of the bottled water being safer than tap water may actually be a true statement that it is safer than tap water. Whereas in other geographic regions, that may not be an instance, but there is sort of an attitude that the consumer has adopted, perhaps, that it is in fact safer. And some of these values can be kind of categorized, and I'm realizing this doesn't show up completely well on the screen, but this bottom category, this bottom layer here, has to do with functional values and meeting. So what sort of needs does the consumer have? What do they value? So perhaps they want a product that helps, that reduces the effort on their part. So they don't have to put a lot of effort into fulfilling their need or having their problem solved by purchasing your product. Or perhaps there's an emotional benefit that the consumer gains by purchasing their product. Maybe a certain flower or plant reminds them of their grandparents' house, for instance. And so that you're able to tap into that nostalgia that a consumer is looking to fulfill. There's some life-changing aspects that some consumers may be looking for, and they say, if I purchase your product, it provides me hope, or perhaps they're motivated to take the next step along, in terms of a goal that they're trying to meet themselves personally. And finally, there's this top impact. It's cut off, so I can't recall what it is offhand, but it's sort of that, this self-transcendence value where they're helping the greater good. So not only are they purchasing a product that they fulfill a personal need for, but their purchase helps the greater good. And there are some, I think there's a shoe company, for instance, where, and I can't recall the name of it off the top of my head at the moment, but if you purchase these shoes, there's a certain portion of their proceeds that they donate into sort of a charitable good, and some consumers may be drawn to that. And so understanding these values and what consumers are thinking about when they look to purchase your product and solve their problems, can help your choices and help guide your strategies and tactic choices about maybe certain product characteristics, the pricing that you place on your products. Understand here for school purposes, place may not be so much of an issue. You may not have too many choices in that, but then promotion. So the language and the messaging that you use for your promotion can be guided through that. And a really great exercise, and I think you could use this in your classrooms, but it's also a great exercise for any business owner, is to develop these customer profiles where they synthesize all of that information from those different categories and come up with what we call a customer profile. So kind of it helps pull all of this together. So the demographics, the geographics, the psychographics, and the behavioral aspects into sort of this average person. And you can see the example here I have on the screen. We've got, they even attached a picture to this customer profile so that, when somebody's thinking about their marketing tactics and their strategy, okay, they've got somebody that they can picture and say, okay, this is who we're targeting and how would you best do it. And so it just gives something a little bit more solid to work with than sort of, some very vague statements on a piece of paper. If you put together this customer profile, and you can have several of these. You might have, your primary customer profile and a secondary customer profile, and attach different strategies to different profiles. I think with that, I'm toss it back over to John.
Thanks, Sarah. That's really interesting information. I really like, particularly resonates with me about the cause base, to resonate with people in their hearts, to make them feel like they're part of your business, to share the same sort of ethical driver. I really like that you brought that up. So that's pretty cool. What I'm going to do is continue with Sarah's theme here of activities. And what we're looking at here on this slide is what's called a SWOT analysis. And a SWOT analysis looks at a brainstorming activity that you can try in the classroom. And we have a template on the next couple of slides. And actually, we'll end up emailing this out to you as well, so you can put it right to action in the classroom. But what, in a nutshell here, the strength, weakness, opportunity, and threats, that's what the SWOT stands for. Actually, what the exercise does is it looks at what your business or what your product does better than anything else, or what it does well on the strength side. So that's an internal thing. So you brainstorm and list a bunch of items down. For example, what unique resources can you draw on might be a strength. When you flip it over and then you say, okay, what do you do to improve? What can you do to improve? That might be something that's a weakness. And you list these things and you be real, because at the end of the day, it's not just a list. This is an activity that's going to help position your products into a market, and it'll help you to look at some of the different threats from the external market, from the external side of it, and turn those threats into opportunities. So you come up with what's called a SWOT matrix that you make some decisions based on this model. I'm going to see if my slide goes forward here.
I think you have to accept the remote control.
I did. So sticking with the theme of SWOT, I apologize for the technicalities here. We did practice this and we had it so it was working. So I'm not exactly sure what happened between then and now, but when we look at Starbucks, and now this is an example that Dr. Kelly had shared with us, because a lot of people resonate with Starbucks. So when Starbucks looked at their weaknesses, they said, yeah, we're a little high price. And we have an approach that brings Starbucks pretty much exactly the same in most of the cultures. So, but when they look at their strengths, they're the biggest coffee house in the world, and they have a really solid global supply chain of that supplies them with high quality materials and inputs. So when you're looking at the horticulture industry, you could transcend some of these different principles into your own strength and weakness, opportunity, and threat SWOT analysis. And unfortunately, the control's not working to be able to advance my slide.
John, I'll just advance it for you. I'm not sure what the problem is.
Again, I'm really sorry. We do hundreds of Zooms a year, and this is the only one in years that I've ever had an issue with. So I'll just keep going like it never happened. So on the opportunity and threat side, again, this is the external market. So you're looking at your supply chains, potential expansions to emerge into new economies. Now, this is sticking with the SWOT example for Starbucks again, and looking at expansions in your retail operation, perhaps co-branding with other food manufacturers. And here's where a lot of times I find in my exercises with folks around the state, they look at that, they're not really looking at the threats here big enough. So in this example here, we're looking at rising prices of the bean industry as a whole, and in dairy products that tie back in to what Starbucks puts on the shelves and into their coffee products. And we look at the idea of market saturation. So in the next slide here, Sarah, we can advance, and it has a demographic of how many Starbucks are in the United States and global. So Starbucks, in response to their SWOT, decided to say, well, we're going to do a massive outreach here and build quite a few Starbucks across the country. And some interesting statistics that we came up with here are that in New York is where the most of the Starbucks, with 277, and in Seoul has the most of 287. So also, you can keep that next slide up. Some of these are timed. Starbucks was positioned to be ready with their drive-through when the doors closed for COVID. So it's something of interest to think through of potential scenario planning in current times for different sort of moves to help you move with the market. So the next slide here, Sarah, will have the example here of the SWOT analysis worksheet, and you'll see there's 4 blank squares here. So you brainstorm with your students about the strengths of your product and weaknesses of your product. You write down what's internal weaknesses, what is external threats and opportunities, and then you bounce these ideas around. It's really only as good as the person that's brainstorming the activity and how open-minded everybody is in that moment to what might emulate out of this activity. But it really is kind of fun. It gets kids involved with it. We've used it quite a bit in our own lives here with Extension as educators, and also we do it in adult learning too. So the next slide here coming up sort of pivots a little bit, and it talks about the things that are born out of the SWOT, which is a few strategies of deciding what to sell when you might have accessory heavy items or perishable consumers that you're getting out onto the market. You might have limited editions and others. So let's get right into the accessory heavy items. We have these very miniature gardens. So this is a garden that you buy, and you keep building onto it with accessories. And you can see here in that middle picture on the bottom, that little tag says $12.99. So some of these accessories really tie in, and they empower you to offer to the customers things that are going to not only boost your sales, but they're going to make these fairy gardens like very unique to that person too. So it sort of helps tie back to that pyramid that Sarah showed a little bit ago. Moving on to the next slide is perishable and consumables. So this is a really neat attribute. Here we can advance to the next slide, please. The attributes of indoor gardening, for example. The gardening is fun, yes, as it is. It's fun for me to get my hands dirty out there, and I'm sure most folks on this webinar may enjoy gardening as well. But the attributes and features that you can accentuate through your education and your promotion are for the self-care of the plants and for yourself. So here's a couple of examples. Plants clean the air. Younger generations find themselves with less space and time and money, so they're turning to indoor plants for the benefits rather than big, large gardens. There's some studies that Dr. Kelly shared with us, by the way. And the last and final bullet down here says, plant parents are so turned to the greenery, stores are selling out of millennials' favorite houseplants. They're selling out of millennials' favorite houseplants. The categories is seeing greater percentages growth in shrubs, trees, and perennials. So this indoor gardening is on the rise. So this might be something for you to try right away with the things that you're offering in your scholastic programs, and to mention this in the horticulture marketing aspects of your curriculums. The next slide here is this one resonates quite a bit with me. It's the repeat sales. So to Sarah's point with the McDonald's example, this pops up here in our gardening examples and our horticulture examples too. So if you sell or offer a bird feeder, for example, you want to tie in and offer the bird seed, but then provide incentives and things for folks to come back and buy the bird seed again, because backyard birding is here to stay. And again, this is just one example of something in the market that people are responding to with this idea of cyclical or repeat sales. The other one that pops to mind isn't necessarily in horticulture, but it's the dog supply and cat supply websites. Some of them, the Chewies out there, there's a number of them now, but you get on a revolving schedule and it's your products show up at the door. I think these are some really neat principles that we can borrow from very large companies and replicate to teach our next generation learners, and we can replicate them in our own businesses. If we move on to the next slide, the limited editions are really kind of cool. It's the next slide here has an example of a store out in State College that does limited editions, one of a kinds. They do annual introductions, and then they do retirements of those introductions quite rapidly. And what this does is it creates this sense of urgency, and we have to have it now from our customers to pique their interest. And it's really neat to be able to think of having the first of a limited edition. I find if you can let some of those opportunities transcend into your programs, you might be able to replicate something like this with plant sales or a unique variety, which, by the way, is what we're going to look at in the next slide. This is Jenga plants. So when Jenga plants offered these cuttings of these very rare and exotic plants, you can see here in this top left, the top right box here, it says they sold out of these cuttings in minutes. They weren't quite ready for the anticipation of the demand, but they're keeping up with it. So I just wanted to mention that it's the idea of the rare plant collections. People pride themselves on having things that no one else does. And for Jenga plants to leverage that and put it into a web profile or a web program rather, that's easy to access and easy to understand was very, very cool. So I think that that's something that we can take away here from this program. Keeping on to the hard to find locally in the next slide. What I did is some research in my local backyard and in Southeast Pennsylvania, because that's where I'm from. So I wanted to share you some really neat, hard to find things that I found out there that I thought were of interest that we might be able to use as a model. So on the left here is a local company. And why I put this on here is if you read that top bullet line, it says we have handmade spotted lanternfly Christmas ornaments. So here's a customer that has taken something like the spotted lanternfly and sort of flipped it over and made it a Christmas ornament. And now they sell these Christmas ornaments. So this is something that was on their website. It's actually up right now. I retrieved this just a few days ago. So I'm not supplying or endorsing or anything like that. I'm just mentioning that I found it a very unique opportunity to share something that I've never seen before. And on the right here, we're looking at a company down south of Reading along Route 422 that offers an incredible selection of very unique bonsai garden plants and ornamentals. And I just think that these are some neat things that you might want to infuse in what you have to offer to try something new in your offerings for your next round. The next slide here goes into the tie-in products. So this is a slide from a fellow out in Montana that's been doing handmade trowels and gardening tools. Now you can see in the three pictures, they're not your average gardening tool. So where this is positioned in the market isn't for the low cost, let's sell a lot of volumes. This is going to be something that's a very specialty item. So this is going to be a niche market item. But I encourage you to explore this opportunity to look at some of these different niche marketings. And I think this is really neat to be able to share this with you folks today, because maybe there is something that you can try in the niche market. I'll move on in the next slide here, Sarah, if you could, to think through some of the things that you might offer now that are free, that you might want to consider the pluses and minuses offering it for a fee, or vice versa. Maybe there are things now that you have for fee that you want to offer and consider offering for free. So the next slide here has a couple of examples. The first one that I find of interest resonates with me all the way back to when I got out of college in '98 is delivery. Does your organization or does your school offer delivery? And if they do, how much weight, what size items, and how far do you deliver? And at what cost do you deliver? I encourage you to dig into that a little bit deeper, even after the webinar today. How much education and promotion do you supply to your customers? Do you have little notes and things that go out for the plant healthcare of the plants that are being bought, or at greenhouses of the poinsettia sales? Do you have aftercare? One of the things that's neat is if you're selling basil plugs or something like that, a lot of people don't know what to do with basil when they get it home. Do you put it in the refrigerator? Do you water it or not? So education is key. This one here resonates with me. When John asked me to present today, I was immediately thinking of some of these different plant healthcare services that go beyond maintenance. So you might want to see what's involved with that you can offer free or for fee with some of these things too. And the last one here, this one really hits home with me, was the landscape design and garden design services. So when you go to the nursery or you offer plants through a plant sale or something like that, people might not know what to do with them. So if you have someone there just to do a conceptual bubble diagram that wouldn't take a lot of investment in time or treasure, that might be just kicking that experience up to the next level for that consumer or that that customer. And I think what happens is that customer remembers that moment, and they may further come back and be a patron of your school sale or your business in the future. Moving on just a little bit from services is, if we have services, we need to connect with our customers. And a lot of times, as Sarah introduced, we do this through social media. And what my portion here that I would like to relay is that I encourage you to make lifetime connections. So a lot of times it's great to have the one-time sale, but as McDonald's found in their example that Sarah showed as well, we really want repeat customers. So we want to find those connections through our social medias platforms of where those customers are, and then reach out to them time and time again. The next slide talks just a little bit about the promotional aspect that I really like to tie in. When I talk with people about promotion, I really like to tie in that opportunity to educate and promote at the same time. So it's not only how do your customers learn about your products, how will you communicate, interact, and engage, but it goes beyond that into the advertising. And then the most successful advertising and promotion centers even deeper into that with the how and the when and the where. And for you to put timing into the location of your promotional educational outreach activities really will contribute to the success or failure of this idea of lifetime customers. I really find that very interesting, and it drives me to really think outside the box of the wording, the wordsmithing of your social media, and not to be remiss if I would remember to talk about the power of a great picture too. You know, a picture is really worth 1,000 words. So moving on again to the idea of social media, I just want to share a few more things about this. Think of this for a second. Let's take a little brain bake and pause. How many messages do you really think a person receives in a day? The studies do show that we receive between 6,000 and 10,000 ads. Now, this is everywhere, on your way to work, social media, billboards, all sorts of places like that. My message, Dr. Kelly's message, and I'm sure Sarah agrees as well, is how do you make yours stand out? There's a lot of different things we can do with the color of the advertisements. There's a lot of things that we can do with powerful words. There's a lot of things that you can try with briefly describing what your product does. So overall, what does promotion do? Helps to build relationships. It helps to persuade people to come to try your product. Promotion and outreach can also help remind customers of what they're about to maybe take part in with your organization if you have an upcoming sale or something like that going on. And most importantly, or equally importantly rather, is to inform your product or your customers of where to find your product and when. So I really want you to think of the how and the why when it comes down to this slide here of when you go into your media planning. So the next slide talks about media planning. It is a combination of defining your media planning goals. So we want you to set goals for your outreach and then selecting the most important media outlet based on your target market. And this ties back to that demographic slide that Sarah talked about, not just that one, but there are others. The idea of the different age groups that are around in your market. We like to have a pre-test and then implement and then retest and test again, and then be sure not to forget to evaluate your responses to the media. So if you tried something and it didn't work, you can try it again another time, or you can react a little bit differently and then move ahead with what you've learned from that experience. The next slide is another activity. This is a little bit of a wordy slide, but I'm really not going to go too much in depth. This is really for you to help empower your students with the thought that this diagram will be sort of like a live document. And what it's called is Porter's 5 Forces. Michael Porter was a professor that really felt like when you position your product or your good or your service or your entire business into an industry, that these 5 forces all come into play. So briefly, you'll list the threat of new entrants and their interactions into your business. You'll list and discuss the bargaining power of your buyers. So how much power does your customers have, the size of each customer order, price sensitivities. I think Sarah's going to get to that in a few minutes. but you'll list and discuss the threat of substitute products. So what can people pivot to and buy if yours isn't available, and things like that. This exercise actually is a brainstorming activity similarly to the SWOT that also talks about the number and the size of the suppliers and how they have bargaining power with your product, your good, or your service. And lastly, up on top here, it talks about the rivalry among existing competitors. So the number of people in the same market are selling similar products that you have, the diversity of your competition, and the industry concentration of that. So this model discusses all the different factors, and you can come up with strategies to position. Very, very helpful. And I'll move on to my final slide, and then I'm going to throw it back to Sarah to take us home here with the rest of the presentation. I just want to remind you that over the last 15 or so minutes that I've been talking, I want you to understand that you got to believe that you know your market, and you do that through a SWOT analysis. You do that looking at the 7 strategies for selling. You do that through education and promotion of your product, your good, or your service. And remember that we want to connect with life for our customers, not just a one-time. And I also wanted to not only just introduce that Porter's 5 forces, but hopefully compel you to dive deeper into researching that more and trying that in the classroom. And before I pass the baton to Sarah, I just wanted to mention that when you think of that SWOT analysis, strength, weakness, opportunity, and threat, you can also flip that upside down and start with your threats and opportunities, which actually turns it into a TOES exercise, which is kind of a new way of thinking of SWOT, where you really accentuate most of your energy on your opportunities and threats and strategies to piece your products and your goods and your services into the market. So I really want to thank you for the opportunity for my portion here. And Sarah, it's back to you.
Thanks, John. So I'm just going to wrap up the presentation here with a little discussion about pricing your products. And of course, pricing is one of the 4 Ps of marketing. And really how you determine your prices is influenced by both, obviously, the costs to produce or provide the product, as well as there's a number of pricing strategies that can be employed depending on kind of what the consumer segment that you're targeting, what the goals for the business are. So as a school sales, you have certainly probably certain goals that you're trying to accomplish either through sales or educational goals, and you can use you price your products to try to achieve those goals. And you also want to think of, once you determine a numerical figure, think about how your target customers will respond to different pricing strategies or the need to change a price. If you from one year to the next, for instance, if you need to increase the price, or if at some point during the sales period you need to drop a price, for instance, because your plants, for instance, have just been sitting out for very long. How will customers that have both previously purchased as well as those who have yet to purchase, how will they respond to those changing prices? And so thinking about the role of pricing and marketing, it can be an indicator of quality. And so we can see here the sunflowers on the screen. It's like $4.95 for 5 of them. And the customer is going to look at those sunflowers and determine, okay, is that an appropriate price for these sunflowers that I see? If I see a price of $1, I may start to wonder, well, how old is this sunflower? Has it been sitting out? Because you're trying, are they trying to move the product, and so they've dropped that price? So you always want to be thinking about how well the price matches with the quality of the product. And as I just mentioned, it conveys value to the customer. And finally, of course, it determines the profitability of the enterprise. And there's a framework that can be used for considering different pricing methods, and it's called the 3 Cs, and it's costs, customers, and competition. And we've already talked a lot about customers, so I'm going to quickly cover the aspects of costs and competition to pricing. So obviously, you need to know your costs if you're going to set a price. You need to know what that cost of production is for your plant or whatever it is that you're going to sell. And because that helps you set a break-even price. So about a price you set on your product above that break-even price, you'll have some profit. If it's below that break-even price, you're going to not be profitable. And in the short run, sometimes that's necessary, but long run, you don't want to be below that break-even price. And finally, you want to think about a sensitivity analysis. So, what happens if you sell a lot fewer items than what you anticipated when you set your price? What does that do to the profitability of the enterprise? So determining cost of production, you have two aspects. It's going to be both your variable costs and your fixed costs. And variable costs are those that change based on the amount of the product that you're producing. So if you're doing plants, you're going to be thinking about things such as seeds and soil amendments, labor, maybe some fertilizer, the little containers that the plugs are in, that sort of thing. Because you'll use more of all of that if you produce more and less of those things if you produce less. You're going to be thinking about any sort of extra packaging that you may, flats, for instance, or if you're going to do kind of gifts or bouquets, any additional materials that you may need. And also the marketing. Marketing has a cost to it. And so that needs to be factored into the cost of production for your product. And then there's those fixed costs that stay the same no matter what you produce. Things like depreciation, interest. As school programs, you may not have a complete knowledge of what all those costs are, but they're there. And so you want to perhaps build in a set amount of expense to cover what may be a fixed cost. And doing an enterprise budget is a really good activity for determining those costs of production. And so once you come up with that total cost of production, you can then determine what a break-even price is. So this would be the minimum price that you'd want to place on your product. And here I just have kind of the formula for determining that break-even price per unit, where we have the variable cost per unit, and we add that to the value of this total fixed cost divided by the projected units sold. And you'll notice here that I'm pointing out that you're using the projection of how many units of your product you're going to sell as opposed to the number that you produce. There's always a loss. You never sell 100% of your production. So when you're setting the price, you want to use the number of units that you project to sell, not that you're going to produce. And so I have this example. I won't go through it all, but you can see if we follow the math through for then there's a couple of slides that I took out that had the specific numbers on it, but you can see here on the slide that, with a $275 per unit variable cost and plus a $302 for the total fixed, or for the fixed cost per unit sold, the break-even price is $577. Okay, and that's the number we need to use as our basis for determining the price for retail. Certainly we wouldn't want to price under $577. But then once we know that number, then we can start to look at utilizing specific pricing methods. And you can see on this graphic here on the slide, there are numerous pricing methods that can be implemented depending on the customer that you want to target. Perhaps you're looking to generate a certain percentage return on the investment into the business. Perhaps you're looking to get a certain margin on the sale. Perhaps you're bundling products, and so you would perhaps set prices differently for a bundle of certain products than you would if those products were priced individually. There may be certain products that you use as a loss leader and you price them lower. Milk is a great example, and you may have some products in the greenhouse that serve that same purpose as milk. They're things that everybody wants, and so you're going to price them low enough to draw them to your business, and with the hopes that they then purchase additional products that have a higher price on them. And so you want to think about, when you're thinking through these different pricing methods, think about what the mix of products are that you have, that you're offering. If you have just a few products, then you're going to be more limited in the choices that of these pricing methods that you can utilize than if you have a wide range of products. And then also think about the life cycle. So if it's one of those products that John was talking about, where it's a very limited time opportunity, and it's unique, then perhaps you're going to use choose a different pricing method for that than a product that is always available every year. And then finally, when it comes to pricing, you want to understand your competition as well. So, how is your competition pricing their products? What are the different competition points that, why would a customer possibly go to that other business? And is there something you can do regarding competition to draw them to yours with the pricing? Thinking about barriers to entry. So how difficult is it for a competitor to enter the market? That can influence how you set your prices. If it's very easy to get to, for somebody else to set up a similar business down the street from you, then you're not going to have as much wiggle room, for instance, in your pricing, because it would be very easy for somebody else to start a business and price lower than you. And then also, what would your competitor do when they see your prices? How might they react? Will they cut their prices? Will they, perhaps, do something different with their products? Perhaps they start to offer bundles as well. So what will a competitor reaction be based on what they see you doing and how you're pricing your products? And so we're coming up really close to time, so I think we're going to make it here. But those keys to success, set some goals. When it comes to marketing products, you need to have some goals in mind. Take the time to understand your target consumer. Again, it's really important that you understand that you're going to not be marketing to everybody, and those that segment of customers that you are marketing to, they're going to fall into even further defined segments. Those that always come to you, may come multiple and make frequent purchases, some that may make less frequent purchases, and those that may have only just discovered you and make one purchase because they're just learning about you. Understand what your strengths and weaknesses are. Play to your strengths and try to address your weaknesses as possible where you can. Obviously, know your break-even pricing. Understand your cost of production, and then, as good management practices in general, have a plan that ties back to those goals, and then continually monitor, assess, and revise your plan so that you can make adjustments. And last but not least, keep it simple. It's very easy to overthink marketing, but if you just keep it simple, you're more likely to be successful. So with that, we thank you, and we're more than happy to take any questions.
All right, as you're thinking of questions for John and Sarah, I just want to thank you both again, and Kathy, and wishing her safe travels in her flight here.
Right.
So at this time, does anybody have any specific questions? I have a couple of points I'd like to just recap briefly, but are there any specific questions that any of the teachers on the call have? Again, feel free to enter those into the chat, or when I'm done here, just covering a couple quick points. We'd love to hear from you, but I really appreciated the whole presentation in general, but some things that resonated with me was, I know I was guilty of it, and I think too often we as ag teachers are, where we view our greenhouse as, more of a teaching learning tool than anything, and we grow a crop of annuals and maybe a couple perennials for spring sales. But we look at it as, well, we just want to get rid of these plants. But some of the examples, I believe it was John that covered with some of the extras and the add-ons. Wouldn't it be cool to partner with your school's art teacher and art program to come up with some of those like lawn ornament type things? And, I don't know if some art teachers just want to come do their thing, teach what they got to teach and be on with it. But if you do have a really progressive art teacher in your school, it might be willing to, or worth your while to have the conversation with them about something like that for the future. And then also sort of the artisan gardening tools. What a great ag mechanics project. I mean, I know as a former ag mech teacher myself, yeah, you can get metal and have kids weld it together all day long, but it's coming up with good, practical, meaningful projects for them to work on and design and hone their skills at the same time and apply their knowledge. Man, have them create gardening tools that you can sell along with your spring greenhouse sale. And recoup some of the money that gets spent out of your budget on those ag mechanics supplies and materials. I'm sure the district would be appreciative of that. So excellent ideas. I love the concept of multiple, again, every school does it differently, but I know traditionally, the greenhouse will be open during these class periods throughout the day, or from 3 o'clock to 4 o'clock after school for the next 2 weeks. But, creating and designing these different ways for the teachers and other district employees to purchase your products, have them set up a Google form and rotate what student is going to be monitoring that each day, and pulling orders and preparing them and delivering them perhaps throughout the school or the district. Lots of great, I never thought of that, ideas that came out of this presentation for me. So thank you. We do have Diana Jarema says she doesn't have a greenhouse. Do you have any ideas for her as to how she can incorporate? And I would, Diana, if you want to unmute, feel free to, but I would sort of take that a step further and say she's probably asking, how do I get students practicing horticultural marketing if we don't have a greenhouse that we can actually be selling things out of?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, hi,
We can,
Diane. Thanks
Diane.
for your question.
Yeah, how are you?
Great.
Yeah, so, and we also are like hardcore in Amish country. So it's really tough to kind of even remotely try and compete with the level of greenhouse
Are you
that,
Oxford?
that they have around here. I really did love the ideas of the some of the different, I'm kind of like thinking maybe there's value in all these little spider plant babies after all. I don't know.
Yeah.
But what I guess with no greenhouse facility, or how can we get these kids doing some of these hands-on things that might have some value for them to maybe help them to fundraise or
Yeah, I'm actually going to be impulsive, but I think that it's going to resonate with you. You can think of container gardening. I mean, down in Oxford, if you're in down south, you're right. There's a lot of market down there for annuals, perennials. There's a big Amish Mennonite precedence, and English too. There's lots going on. There's produce auctions, but you can think a little bit maybe or consider the features and the attributes and benefits of the container gardening, or something that you could not only use as the education, but you can then have a product that you would sell. Maybe rooted cuttings, you could experiment with rooting hormones and not rooting hormones, or different is it fertigation, where you use the water soluble fertilizer. You can test scientific method, test some of those things, and then you'd have a saleable product. You could maybe buy mum cuttings from bulk and pot them up in the fall. There's a number of different suppliers that'll give you the little tiny plugs that you could pot up. Maybe there would be the way to do some other education on the pot. Maybe the pot itself has the instructions. It's written in a very neat calligraphy or something. Again, just impulsively sharing some of the things that I've seen over the years. Sarah, I bet you Sarah has some ideas too. I see her smiling.
No, I like your ideas, John. I'm not as familiar with what the opportunities are horticulturally. I was thinking of more of, from that kind of business marketing perspective. So, how could you teach some of those lessons? And, although, if there was, some businesses that maybe, the students could go and create different marketing plans for, or maybe assess what that business is doing. I don't know from the Amish, how receptive they might be to it, but if there were some English businesses that, you could connect with and partner with, and just allow the students to, to maybe get more of a behind the scenes look at what a particular business is doing, and maybe give them a project where how would you do it if this was your business, or what might what do you think a good addition to this business would be, and kind of make them come up with kind of that marketing pitch for who is this going to connect with, how would they price it, how would they promote it, so that covering those 4 Ps.
So I guess then really the goal here is actually to teach, I guess maybe to focus on it as teaching the students these skills in this process, as opposed to, hey, we're going to get rich off of taking cuttings. So it's about the process, not the and
Yeah, it's
dollar bill.
The saying that pops into my head, Diane, and I hadn't thought about this in a number of years, but the destination is the journey. It's one of those moments where the kids are going to immerse themselves. But they might try, they might fail, they might exercise different leadership qualities of resilience when they try and bounce back with a new task because of what they learned in the SWOT. That's why Sarah and I wanted to provide a couple of templates for things that we can email out to you to give a shot at in the classroom. So
well, I appreciate it. It helps shift my perspective as well too, because I always feel it's such a disadvantage to these other ag programs that have the full-blown greenhouses and barns and that kind of stuff. And so this was a really good shift in perspective for me, to remind me to focus on the process of bringing the kids along for the journey, and not just this end goal of, hey, we want to do this. So I really appreciate that perspective shift.
It's our pleasure. Have you had the opportunity to network up with the Octorara?
We do a little bit, not a whole lot. I mean, no, I have contact a little bit with North Creek Nursery has helped us. They provided us some plugs, and we repotted plugs, and actually the kids did sell. They did sell those, and I made the kids do design like an informational, this is the needs that this plant does, this is its scientific name. So and then then COVID hit, and then we kind of forgot everything. So I just need to maybe go back to that again, because that was actually pretty successful. Just getting some plugs from them that they had leftover flats. They couldn't sell a flat because it wasn't full or something. And so maybe
there's plugs. Keep in mind the plugs, there's rooted cuttings, there's the aquaponic or hydroponically grown rooted cuttings with no soil on them at all that you can direct. You can do the dibble activities in the 806s with the pencil. I mean, I encourage you to keep your spirits up. You're smiling, you're having fun with it. The kids need to see that too. So
Thank you.
It's great that we're able to have things resonate with you. I'm really
Thank you.
pleased for the positive feedback. I would be remiss if I didn't mention how weird it was when I couldn't advance my own slides, but if we reacted and we bounced back. So
Well, they say, well, we taught like that for a year and a half, so it's like nothing.
right.
Please.
Well, thanks. I appreciate it. It's great.
Thank you.
Great discussion there. Just another thought that I had during that I wanted to highlight was I also love the concept of taking like your greenhouse management class, and again the practical and the applied. This is how you pot or transfer a cutting from this pot to this pot and so on. This is what needs to happen to acclimate right before the sale and so on. But that technical writing piece I loved of again, the focus tends to be on, all right, get the plants potted, grow the plants, sell the plants, get rid of the plants. But having maybe breaking your class depending on how big it is, or assigning each student in the class one of the plants that you're selling and having them write the care directions and the planting directions of the whatever, brings in that technical writing piece, which is very important in various industries. And it's again another way of you can show, yeah, we're doing writing in ag class. And again, they're going to learn, I bet you that kid that you assign to the pansies, they're going to remember how to care for pansies for the rest of their life. So after that assignment, so I encourage you to experiment with that.
That's fantastic. I'm going to tie something in that's very relevant that you don't learn in the classroom, that I never learned, but I would love to have learned it in the classroom. So share this. It's to your point, John, of hardening plants off. So there's not only a marketing and an outreach and an educational aspect of hardening plants off as you sell them to the customer, particularly this time of year, because the way that our plant industry works is that the local nurseries don't grow all their own plants. They broker through other plants that are coming up from other growing zones from the south. So take, for example, the hydrangea. A hydrangea that comes into a nursery here in Berks County it's already sensitized, and we're having frost nights. So you put that out into the landscape and it's not hardened off yet, and you might have some damage to that. So there is an educational aspect that you could have the students learn now and be able to share that with the customers. Even if you're doing your own plant sales down there in Oxford or any of the other districts in the state, there's some really neat things that you can share with people just like that. I learned that one the hard way. I would be doing landscape designs in the early spring, and the leaves would show the brown frost damage, and I would wonder why. And over the years, it occurred to me that they're coming up from other zones into our zone 5-6. So, well, actually, we're zone 6. I grew up in 5-6. So, yeah, I think that's pretty relevant to bring that one up. But
Yeah,
are there any others from Lindsay or Christopher or Diana? Do you have any questions or thoughts or comments before we?
I don't, but thank you for being here and giving us some good information.